My pleasure, my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, which is the USDA Deputy Secretary Censky. Deputy Censky was sworn in to his role in October of 2017 after unanimous consent by the U.S. Senate. And prior to rejoining USDA, Deputy Censky served as CEO of the American Soybean Association for 21 years. He's had a very long career in agriculture policy, including work, that's for you, a long career in legislative policy, working as assistant in the U.S. Senate, as a legislative assistant in the U.S. Senate, and several prior positions within USDA that ultimately led to him being the administrator of the Foreign Agricultural Service. We're very fortunate that Deputy Secretary has agreed to take time from his many pressing responsibilities to meet with us today. And as we were talking earlier, he has a very broad portfolio of things to keep on track of, and for him to be here is very, very special, and we appreciate it. Deputy Censky will address the current USDA priorities, opportunities to continue advancing sustainable agriculture, and some of the challenges we will encounter along the way. After his remarks, Deputy Censky will be joined by Krista Harden for a discussion right here on stage. It will be moderated by Alan Weber. And for that discussion, audience members will have an opportunity to submit questions in writing using the note cards that are at your table. So please be thinking of the questions which you would like to pose for Krista Harden and Deputy Censky. And so now, I would like to introduce Deputy Secretary Censky and give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's all yours.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. What a pleasure it is to be with you here today and to help celebrate 30 years of sustainable ag research and education and the National Center for Appropriate Technology. It's very important not only that we celebrate those past accomplishments, but I think the work that all of you are going to be doing here at this conference to help set the direction of the next 30 years of sustainable ag research and education is extremely important. So I'm delighted to be here with you today. As Rob said, my background, I'm a farm boy from southwestern Minnesota. I grew up on a corn, soybean, alfalfa, diversified livestock farm. And then I've been working in agriculture policy my whole life. So I've been absolutely thrilled to have this opportunity to serve at USDA as the Deputy Secretary, to work with Secretary Perdue, and to really try to move the needle for U.S. farmers, ranchers, and our forests as well. I come to this, I've been on the job now about 5 months. I've learned a lot, though, during that 5 months, and so I'm always humble about always learning, and that's one of the things I look forward to at this conference as well. And I have to admit, though, that and maybe some of that humility comes with age. I wasn't always so humble. I thought maybe earlier in my career I had more answers. I thought I had a lot of the answers. And it harks me back to earlier in my career, back when I was working at USDA. I was working as the administrator of the Foreign Agriculture Service, and I thought I had a lot of the answers. And it was during the noon hour one day, and the phone rang, and I answered the phone, and it was a Reverend Johnson, who was a Methodist minister from down in Texas. He said he had a problem and that there was a dead mule on the parish's front lawn, and he wanted the Department of Agriculture to take care of that mule. Well, I sympathized with Reverend Johnson, but said I didn't see how it was our responsibility to take care of this mule, this offspring of a horse and a jackass. Well, he said, well, young man, let me tell you a few things. The mule has been used as a beast of burden throughout agriculture's history. It has tilled the soil. It has pulled the barges up and down our canals and rivers. It has driven the mule trains out west that were so responsible for the westward expansion of agriculture. And so the mule's history is inextricably linked to U.S. agriculture, and I do think it's your responsibility to take care of that mule. Well, I was feeling a little bit like an expert and a know-it-all, and I said, but Reverend Johnson, I thought you preachers were supposed to take care of the dead. And there was a long pause, and he said, yes, but we like to notify the next of kin first. So it is coming from the position of humility that I tell you that every day I know that I wake up and I know that Secretary Perdue comes to the job working to see what can we do to try to help U.S. farmers, ranchers, and rural America succeed. What can we do to unleash the innovation, improve the competitiveness, and remove obstacles? And it's appropriate, I think, that all of you are here today and the work that you're going to be doing during the course of this conference to take a look at what can we do to try to help U.S. agriculture feed a growing world population while protecting the environment in the face of emerging pests and diseases, and how we can make U.S. agriculture more resilient. Because you all know, I think, what the challenges that we face. Today in this world, as you know, we have 7.6 billion people on the face of this earth. And over the next 12 years, by the year 2030, we're projected to have 8.6 billion people. Think about that. Another billion people in the next 12 years. And then by 2050, the UN is projecting that we're going to be approaching 10 billion people. So in the next 32 years, we're going to have to produce more food than we have in the last 10,000. And we're going to have to do that in a way while we face a changing weather patterns, climate, diseases, pests, and while all at the same time trying to help make sure that producers are profitable. Because you can't have sustainability without profitability, as you all know, and that is, of course, at the heart also of sustainable agriculture. I can tell you that USDA is so proud to have funded over the last 30 years the work of SARE and the great work that has been accomplished. Over the last 30 years, we have funded a total of about $250 million in more than 6,300 projects. Those have included projects on soil health, where we've invested over $77 million in 1,800 different projects, ranging from cover crops to conservation tillage to nutrient management and soil microbiology. We've invested in grazing, over $41 million in projects ranging from pasture management to forage production to rotational grazing. We've invested in water and the work that's been done there, over $41 million in projects ranging from irrigation efficiency to drought-tolerant species, and again to conservation tillage. We've invested in integrated approaches to pest management. We've invested in pollinators, wildlife, and biodiversity. And lastly, importantly, we've also invested in the people and what are the social components of sustainable agriculture. Over $34 million in over 1,000 projects, ranging from business and financial planning to networking to beginning farmers and ranchers. One of the things that I think makes the SARE program so unique are the regional administrative councils, where the funding goes out toward, who oversee those grant opportunities and make those selections. The diverse perspectives and the active engagement of those folks that serve on those regional administrative councils is really key to making sure that the research is relevant and meaningful to the regional areas and the economies. We also know that this program has so many moving parts, and it wouldn't be successful without the people that are, and those of you that are here today, that serve from the host institutions at the various land-grant universities. You are the ones that are making sure that the program runs effectively, efficiently, and this is an important and, that the results are communicated out to farmers and ranchers. So thank you for what you do. And then this program is also completely dependent on the farmers, the ranchers, the researchers, the non-governmental organization folks, the educators, the industry professionals that are so responsible for coming up with the ideas, the research ideas, the research projects, and then helping to guide them through every step of the way. I think also what makes the SARE program so unique is, of course, its focus on farmers and ranchers, because no project is likely to be successful unless farmers and ranchers have been involved at the very beginning in helping to come up with the ideas, and then are also involved throughout the entire project in helping to guide it along the way, and then helping to communicate the results and ensure that it is effective. So thank you for all of the work that has been done there. In addition to the great work that is being done by SARE, and we're pleased that we have this year, as you know, the Congress just recently enacted the bipartisan budget agreement. It provided about a 30% increase in funding for this year for the SARE program, up to $35 million. And I know that Rob and his team are going to be active already are active in working with the regional councils who are looking at the projects, and we're going to be working closely throughout the rest of this year to make sure that those projects, that funding is put to good and effective use to fund the projects. I also want to talk a little bit about, outside of SARE, some of the important work that's being done and being funded by USDA. First is through NIFA, which funds the SARE, their National Institute on Food and Agriculture. And one of the interesting things is the Sustainable Agriculture Systems Program, which is going to be a new program, underneath the Agriculture Food Research and Initiative. And we'll be investing $80 million in system-level projects. They're going to take an integrated approach on how we can improve agriculture productivity, all in the context of improving soil and water health, productivity, and sustaining the profitability of producers and rural communities. That is going to be important, large, broad-scale research that can help inform, and I think will be a good feeding ground for SARE projects that are then looked at in the future at the regional level. Also through AFRI, we plan to increase the investments in research on the microbiome of soil, of plants, of farm animals, as well as on agriculture data applications, so that we are able to use the data that is coming and that farmers, both large farmers, medium-sized farmers, and importantly small farmers, can utilize that data that is available to help them improve their farming operations and farm more sustainably. Also through the Agriculture Research Service, our in-house agriculture research arm of USDA, also doing a lot of research that is promoting sustainable agriculture and sustainable agriculture production. Just one example is our ARS researchers have developed a decision tool for comparing rental agreements that producers can use for comparing at least five different crops and management systems to see, and different kinds of land rent arrangements to see what is going to be the most profitable system for them as they move forward. That system, called Crop Rent, all one word, is available for free and is downloadable along with its accompanying user manual. In the area of water quality, I can tell you that ARS researchers are really working on game-changing research there. One example is that ARS researchers have developed a water purification system to remove nitrogen from wastewater at 1/3 the cost of existing technologies. ARS researchers are working with some commercial developers to make that available in the Chesapeake Bay watershed to help address the septic tanks. Over 52,000 septic tanks need to be improved in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and to do that, we're making this technology available, and it can reduce the cost of making those upgrades to those septic tanks by about 2/3. Importantly, and this is really neat, this shows that our agriculture researchers really are like rocket scientists. Our ARS researchers are making this technology available to NASA so that NASA can utilize this on how to treat wastewater and recycle wastewater in space. Our ARS scientists have also saved millions of gallons of water through the research that they're doing on irrigation systems. They're working in California and a lot of the arid states of the West on developing automated irrigation systems that monitor rainfall, soil health, ground moisture, and are able to have a variable rate irrigation to put just the right amount of water where it needs to be. We also know, and this is important, been an important part of SARE, about the growing domestic opportunities that exist for farmers to market their crops here in both international as well as, of course, domestic markets. We know that the local food movement, all of us read about it, all of us experience all the time, is growing. And there's, according to some of the latest research, we have 167,000 producers sold around $8.7 billion worth of crops in 2015 directly to consumers, retailers, institutions, and some of the local distributors. We also know that consumers are looking for local food when they go to their supermarkets. They have a lot of choice in supermarkets, and the National Grocers Association reports that around 87% of consumers look at whether a grocer is offering local foods when making their decisions on where to shop. And similarly, at the restaurant level, the National Restaurant Association reports that about 92% of fine dining establishments are making it a priority to offer local foods on their menus. And what was surprising to me, you expect that from the high-end dining establishments, but importantly, around 73% of casual dining establishments find it important to offer local foods, and around 35% of quick service restaurants are also looking to make available local foods. So we at USDA are also busy working to try to invest and support that local food marketing channels. Just last month, USDA announced $89 million is available to support specialty crop growers and strengthen local food markets. We have the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program that has been announced. And this helps ensure the competitiveness, makes block grants available to our state departments of agriculture to support the direct marketing of our fruits and vegetables. The deadline for the applications from the states is May 24th. We also have the farm market and local food promotion programs that are available from USDA. Again, these are supporting to try to help support direct marketing opportunities and strengthen local food distribution opportunities. We have around $26 million in funding that's been made available under those two programs, and that application deadline is coming up on May 7th. And then we also have the Federal Marketing Improvement Program, which is supporting the opportunity for innovative domestic marketing ideas, also making available funding there, over $1 million in funding to support innovative ideas there. And again, the deadline is coming up on May 7th. So before we move on to the panel, I just want to say congratulations again. Congratulations to all of you for the work that you have done to move sustainable agriculture research and education forward over the last 30 years, and for the work that you will do over the next 30 years to really move the needle and help us succeed. The challenges we know are great. The challenges that are facing agriculture couldn't be more pressing, but I do have confidence, thanks to the good work of the people that are in this room, that we're going to be able to rise to meet those challenges. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for the work that you're doing, as we say at USDA, to do right and feed everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Okay. And if you can have a seat there, great. I wanted to point out that what Deputy Censky pointed out just recently, just in his presentations, about the $80 million that's going to be in the NIFA, Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, or the AFRI program for sustainable ag systems. That was one of the first broad public announcements of that upcoming program. But if you put it together, we're looking at $35 million in SARE, $80 million in the AFRI program. That's over $100 million, which is being invested in the science which is going to support the sustainability of our entire agricultural systems. Some of you in this room were there when we were struggling for $3 million. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and I'd like to introduce Krista Harden, is currently the Vice President of External Affairs and the Chief Sustainability Officer for Corteva Agriscience. And that's the agricultural division of Dow DuPont. And for me, I struggle sometimes because I've always known Dow and DuPont as one company. They've merged, they're married together as Corteva, and so she is in this role both as Chief Sustainability Officer and the Vice President of External Affairs. Prior to joining Dow DuPont in 2016, Ms. Harden was also served like Deputy Censky, has served as a Deputy Secretary of USDA with broad responsibilities, including implementation of the 2014 Farm Bill. Other positions she has held within USDA include Assistant Secretary for Congressional Relations and as Chief of Staff to Secretary Tom Vilsack. Like Deputy Censky, Ms. Harden has extensive legislative experience on Capitol Hill, and she also served as the CEO of a National Association of Conservation Districts. So she's got very broad agricultural background and agricultural policy background. One of the things that I've seen with Krista is that throughout her career, she's focused on expanding opportunities in agriculture for women, for minorities, for immigrants and veterans. And this is a focus that we really share at this conference and in both the SARE and the ATTRA program. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Krista Harden. I'd also like to introduce our moderator for this session. Will be Mr. Alan Weber. Mr. Weber is a founding partner of Mark IV Consulting, which is a consulting company that fosters innovation. It's helpful, provides benefits to both agriculture and the environment. He's been very active in efforts to advance biofuels, both with the National Biodiesel Board and as a member of the Biomass Research and Development Initiative Technical Advisory Committee. I think that's also known as the Perdue Board. Like Krista, Alan is very interested in the next generation of agricultural leaders and has served in several capacities with the University of Missouri and as president of the Agricultural Leadership for Tomorrow Foundation. Mr. Weber also maintains his farm route through active engagement on his family's farm here in central Missouri. So please give Alan a warm welcome. What I'll do now is I'll turn the discussion over to Alan. He'll give you some further guidance on how you can submit your questions in writing for the panel. And with that, Alan, the program is yours.
Okay, cool. Perfect, and good morning to everybody. So, and Rob, thank you, obviously, both for the introductions as well as for the invite for all of us here on the panel. I have to give full disclosure to the group here. This is actually a treat for me because both of the individuals here today have obviously been part of my professional career for quite a while. So I think the world of them, and I'm probably looking forward as much as anything in terms of some of the thoughts and discussions that we have. Rob had mentioned to everybody in terms of kind of how we are hoping to be able to integrate in your thoughts and your questions. And I know just a few minutes ago, there were note cards that were passed out on your tables. And so I will give a heads up to the crowd again that we're going to pick those up. But if you have a question, please write that down. And then we'll collect those in probably the next 5 to 10 minutes. And we'll have a chance then to be able to actually respond to those questions from the group. But Steve, just to kind of get things rolling, I thought you did a great job in terms of setting things up and some of the announcements, a couple of those that I wasn't aware of as well. And so if it's okay, I'm going to flip over then to Krista and we have had a chance to work together for quite a few years.
Don't say how many.
We were counting up some of the years a little bit ago. But I think a lot of people in this room probably know you as much as anything from your role at USDA, and maybe not as much as I do in terms of some of your prior work at NACD in terms of the conservation districts. So I know that a lot of those roles had conservation, sustainability as a key role. So drawing upon that background, into the future, what do you think some of the challenges that we're going to face in terms of sustainability, in terms of how it impacts our food supply? And that might be a good jumping off point for all of us to.
Yeah, that'd be great. And thank you, Alan. It is a lot of fun for me to be up here with two very distinguished friends. And congratulations, Steve. You had the best job in the department, I can tell you. And you're doing a great job and you're having fun too. Before I talk about what I think, can I ask all those farmers to stand up in the room? If you farm full-time, part-time, or you want to farm? Because I think it's very important to think about why we're here, and it really is about you. And I think from knowing these two gentlemen for longer than many years, I want to count, a long time, and knowing that we come from ag roots ourselves. I grew up on a farm in not southern Minnesota, but southern Georgia, as you might tell from my accent. And where my love of the land really started, and my commitment to helping farmers and ranchers, producers really stay on the land. I mean, I think that has been kind of my driving force, and that ethic from my parents, my mom and daddy who are still there, trying to make a living on that land. So it really starts, it's inside, it's not something you really learn, it's just something you have. And I think that love of the land has really helped kind of guide me in making decisions and career choices and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And helping farmers and ranchers and really attract more people into agriculture. I think it is a tough time to be in agriculture. I think we all know that, and I think the pressures, the deputy outlined some of what we're up against with having to feed people. Of course, that's not going to all be done in the U.S., and we know that, but a lot of the farming practices and ideas do, start here. So I think there is a lot of challenge for all of us. And when I worked for NACD, it was a great 5 years learning about conservation at a different level. My kind of personal mantra was every acre counts, and really thinking about how we use every acre wisely. And how do we, and it is about productivity, it is about profitability, it is about protecting our natural resources. All those elements somehow or another have to come together if we are going to grow food, not only for our families, but for other families. So I think this discussion is great. I think Sarah's done a great job over the years, really looking at research, thinking about sustainability and how we do what we do in a lasting way. So I'm excited to be here, and I really do thank all the farmers in the room.
Perfect. So it's interesting, you said one of the things you mentioned was attracting farmers. And Steve, we've obviously worked together for quite a few years as well. So hold that thought as it made me think of this whenever Krista said that. It was just a month or two ago, I was actually taking a load to town to the elevator, and we have a fast pit and we have a slow pit, and for whatever reason they always send me to the slow pit. But I do get to get off the semi that way and chat with whoever's running it, and we're sitting there talking about something, and all of a sudden he refers to me as a young farmer. And then I realized it's like I'm 50 years old. If I'm young, this is a scary time if I'm the young farmer. So in terms of attracting, folks back, that's our talent pool. That's our key asset that we need to be able to pull back onto the farm. What are some of the things that we are doing or that we should look forward to in terms of doing to attract folks back onto the farm or the ranch?
Yeah, and Alan, I think you hit upon a big challenge that we face. I mean, the average age is over 55 years old.
So I am young.
of the U.S. Yeah, so you are a young farmer, Alan. But no, that is a big challenge that we face. And I think, through some of the programs that we have at USDA, and I know Krista, during the time when she was at USDA and Deputy Secretary, helped support and set up some of those programs for beginning farmers and ranchers. But I think it's important we have to maintain those. We have a beginning farmer and rancher loan program through the Farm Service Agency of USDA that I think can be helpful. We have through NIFA funding some of the beginning farmer training programs that's available. and working, I think, with our land grants and our extension, I think can be very important. But I think we also have to look to see what else we can do to try to create those training and mentoring programs. I recently was speaking to a group of students who were attending our Agriculture Outlook Forum that was held in February, which is USDA's big, a lot of you probably participate as well, our big forum where we talk about the outlook for U.S. agriculture and world agriculture. And as I was visiting with those students, one of the students, had asked this kind of similar question, Ellen, about what could be done. And he made the suggestion that what would be needed is, could USDA do something to try to support that networking, that mentoring program, setting up what in my mind is almost like a Match.com type program for beginning farmers and ranchers with older farmers who are looking to transition out. They're well capitalized in many cases. They may not be looking to sell out just to the highest bidder, to the neighbor next door, but are really interested in trying to help get a young farmer started in farming. And what can we do to try to help put those two together, and then establish the training, the mentoring program to give some experience, and then that transition. And I know that some of our state departments of agriculture have worked to try to establish programs like that, and I know that's an idea that I'm taking back to USDA to see how we can try to support that kind of concept.
No, that's excellent. And I think one of the two Robs had mentioned the fact that that's really, in some ways, what tomorrow is about here is also some of those ideas, and that would be something good probably in terms of some of the breakout session to pull some of those ideas back and forth to flesh those out. And obviously there's a conduit now to USDA to feed those ideas. So you mentioned Ag Outlook, and so I was there. And of course that's the time that we have our annual forecast both for crops as well as for the livestock industry. And it wasn't all disappointing. There was some decent news there in terms of prices. But Krista, I heard a friend of mine say not too long ago that with these prices it kind of takes some of the fun out of farming. And do you think that that's impacting the return in terms of individuals interested in terms of farming and ranching, and or kind of flipping that also into the fact that things that we can maybe do not just from an agency standpoint, but where does corporate America fit into this as well?
Well, I think it does impact young people thinking about, can I make a living? Folks who happen to have the luxury of growing up on a farm and have the access to land, coming back to their families. I think that they have to look down and on the back of an envelope, or hopefully on a spreadsheet on a computer, say, can this farm support or ranch support another family coming back home? When I was growing up, it was so tough in the 80s that my family said, do anything but agriculture. Go get a degree in something else, and don't even think about coming back. They were hanging on by dental floss in those days, and it was just a really tough time. Luckily, we're not there, and I hope we have enough safety nets and protections, and we won't get to the state of where we were in the 80s. But I do think young people have to look and say, can this piece of land support my family too? And if you don't own land, I think it's even scarier, and you don't understand agriculture, you don't understand the business side of agriculture. And I think there's a lot of folks who love the land and they want to farm and they care about feeding people and they're driven by that passion, but don't maybe have the business training. And so that's one thing I think that USDA is good about, offering those tools to make sure people really do understand. It may be a family business, but it is a business. And as far as corporations, I think partnerships is what we can offer. We do a lot of training, a lot of apprenticeships, a lot of young people in STEM education find jobs in agribusiness. Many of them kind of farm on the side, until they can build that little nest egg up to go back or get a little piece of land for themselves. So I think there is a relationship there. What I hope is this really, the lows are not going to be as low as they've been. We may not have as high peaks in the short term, but we can level off and really offer the greatest living in the world really is grow up on a farm and farming your own land, as we all know. So I'm hoping that through partnerships and training programs and apprenticeships that Steve was talking about, there is an entry level for folks. And the only other thing that I will add, and get me started on this, and you'll have to mute my mic, is women's role in agriculture. And it's great to see a room this full of women. It makes me happy. And valuing the role of women in agriculture, saying there is a place for you. Not only is there a place for you, there is a needed role for you. We need your voices, we need your experience, we need your ideas, your problem-solving techniques. And so making sure agriculture feels open to everyone, to veterans, to immigrants, to women, I think that's what we've got to do. That's what's going to be the strength, I believe, of U.S. agriculture in the future.
Very good. Well, if the last set of comments and then Steve's comments about the mentoring program and ideas didn't stimulate a question or two, I don't know what will. So hopefully you've already jotted down a few questions, and I think that there are some folks that we have more questions than we know what to do with. That's awesome. So I think there's some folks that are going to circulate through the room and grab those up and bring them up so that we can have the panel start addressing those as well.
The easy ones, right?
Yeah, only the easy ones. Tough questions on the bottom, please.
And I see some people have multiple questions.
Yeah.
We may be here a while.
Well, those questions are coming up. Let me kind of switch gears on a different topic, one that's close to my heart, and I know it's yours as well. So we were talking about beginning farmers and ranchers and returning that asset back to the farm. The flip side is if that's on the top, the below the ground is really around soil health. It's something that my father and I, in terms of our farm, the main way that we have worked with soil health has been cover crops. And what's interesting to me is that it's not necessarily a new technology, but it's really pole vaulted forward, the last few years. Either one of you, any thoughts or comments in terms of why we've seen kind of that renaissance into soil health?
From my perspective, I think it's great that soil's becoming cool again. I do think that we're really just through the research, I see that the opportunity to learn more through the agriculture research of what can be applied at the farm level in terms of the soil microbiome. We're really just at, I think, seeing the tip of the iceberg, if you will, to make a metaphor there, of what the opportunity is and understanding those complex interactions that occur. And I really look for a lot of progress as we look to the future there in soil health and the impact that can have on sustainable agriculture production. I think the work that's been done by SARE, we literally have written a book on cover crops and how to use cover crops in terms of and conservation tillage in farming. I think that's very important. And I think we're just, despite having spent the last 20, 25 years on some of the research on cover crops, I think I really look for great opportunities to expand that knowledge and application in the future.
You made a good point too, referencing through SARE, the fact that producers actually have been on the forefront in terms of soil health and kind of working hand in glove with the agencies on some of the research aspects. What if we think forward 20 and 30 years, we've been advancing on acreage, cover crops specifically, maybe 12, 15, 17% each and every year. Do you think that we're going to continue that push forward?
I think so. I certainly hope so. I think that the renewed interest in cover crops, the renewed interest in soil health, it is just the beginning. And I think farmers are stepping back a bit and thinking about their land as that factory, if you will, of and how you take care of that, how you nourish it, how you make it better. We do talk a lot about productivity, and folks realize that starts with the land and the other natural resources. So I think, rotations, all those kinds of issues, using water better, using inputs in a different way, I think all that is really what we're looking for in the future.
I was going to, a good follow-up would be just what should we be doing forward, but actually, Stephen, your comments, there's a couple things there that I wasn't aware of that I think are great in terms of those programs that are already being put in place. Anything else besides those current programs that would advance things forward in terms of soil health?
Yeah, I think we have to continue on the basic research, but also then the application, because there still needs to be a lot of farmer ground truthing that has to take place and the experiences that have to take place. And I think the programs such as SARE, as well as through the extension, can be very important there. I think one of the challenges, a couple of the other challenges we are going to face is that I think it may be easier, what I hear from producers, it's easier for them to experiment and do that when they own their own land. It's tougher in a rental in a rental environment where you're renting year to year, and I think we have a challenge there of how do we either educate or how do we monetize the value of those cover cropping and soil health practices, so not only the farmer gets paid, but also the landowner gets some benefit as well and begins to understand that this is a long program, it's worth the investment, and he's not just looking for the highest cash rent year to year.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I keep thinking on our own farm in terms of when we first started using cover crops, the questions we had from other individuals about what are you doing, what is it, and the education that kind of goes with that.
And I think so much of farming is tradition, and you have landowners. That's a widow that my family's rented from, and we were talking about doing some conservation practices, and her first comment, well, Joe never did that, you know, and her husband who was deceased, and we're trying to explain, but Joe's been dead, you know, 20 years, and
right.
Things have advanced, and there are different things. So I think it is an education of landowners and helping them understand the value that actually increases the value of their land, even though it might be different or it sounds different from what they're used to.
You know, one of the reasons that we're using cover crops on our farm is just water holding capacity. Grandfather always said we're always 2 weeks away from a drought, and that resiliency. When I was thinking about the comments that you made, Steve, in terms of, you know, another billion people, the resiliency, and then some of the statistics that you were citing, I had not heard in terms of not just fine dining restaurants, but the casual restaurants in terms of the importance of local foods. And I know that there's a whole bunch of individuals in this room that have just done an excellent job of tying production into the actual consumer and that local consumer. So obviously USDA is already doing a lot of things in that area. Other things that we should be thinking about in terms of the local foods, farm to table, farm to institution programs that would be beneficial, or we should, you know, as we think forward 20 and 30 years, what we should be doing?
You know, I look forward. I think it'll be great to hear at this conference the suggestions that come from some of the sessions that are devoted to that, because I think we want to know where can we make a difference, where can we move the needle. I think helping to support the infrastructure, the networking, the distribution channels for some of that local food movement, I think is going to be important for USDA to support. My philosophy has always been an all of the above type philosophy. Obviously, we've seen growing opportunities not only for organic but local food movements. I think we need to support that because that is a great opportunity for profitability for farmers and ranchers, just as we support more conventional agriculture type systems as well.
Great. We have a lot of questions, and so I want to try to move into this. I'm actually going to read two of them at once, and because they're related. And that way you can actually just pick off whichever one you want to. So access to land is one of the largest challenges that are facing beginning farmers, so we're kind of coming back to that return to the land. How do we as a society address this challenge? And kind of tied into that, many young people want to farm, but don't have family land to inherit or that can be passed down, and they must compete with developers for expensive land. Any solutions?
Well, that's an easy one. I do think, you know, what we've talked about before, some of the loan programs, maybe some of the mentoring programs, as was suggested to me from the student at the Ag Outlook Forum, that's an opportunity. I do think, you know, who knows whether we'll have some opportunities to revisit and take a look at the tax code again. While we did deal with the inheritance tax in the last tax act passed by Congress, I know that there was actually some good suggestions that were coming from some quarters about dealing with capital gains. And would it be an opportunity, again, for those farmers who are looking, older farmers who are looking to exit farming, to provide some sort of capital gains tax break to those farmers who are willing to sell to a beginning farmer or rancher? I thought that was an innovative idea, and again, I think that can help address some of those barriers as well. But again, we have to, I think, look to the next, whether there's going to be another tax bill, and see if we can be successful there.
Yeah, it's almost as if we need that ecosystem, so to speak, in terms of different programs to be able to get that to happen. So, anything else?
Only thing I'll add is just I think a lot of our land grant colleges are trying to be that facilitator in many cases to bring folks together. If you have multi-generations and there's a generation who doesn't want to farm, they'd rather sell the land, and why the parents are alive, having the conversation. And it's a tough one. My sister and I are doing the same thing with my parents because neither one of us have kids of our own. And this farm has been, I can get emotional talking about it, in our family forever. And what are we going to do? So I know firsthand, frankly, what that conversation involves, and having my sister and I think about, we want it to stay in agriculture. We don't want to sell it. We want to make sure that we help someone get land, and trying to set that up in our wills now. Even though we're relatively young, a little older than you, Alan, but relatively young. Making those decisions now and having that conversation with my parents and with my sister, it's emotional, it's difficult. You don't want to face it, but I encourage farmers to think about that. If you own land, to look around your neighborhood, look around your region. Are there young people who want to come farm? I know I'm breaking in and out, and I don't know why, but I think having the conversations is one thing that I would encourage farmers to have in your own family. Get a facilitator, get a lawyer, get someone from your land-grant college to sit down with you and think about, how do we set this up so somebody else can have this land and stay in agriculture.
Our next couple of questions, I think, are fun. And Steve, probably directed as much to you, but I think Krista, with your background, will feed right in. So what can SARE and or USDA do to reach and benefit more diverse farmers and communities?
I think that is a challenge. I mean, I think we do, and I think that is one of the unique opportunities through SARE, again, because you do have the regional administrative councils and having projects from the local level, I think can take a look at those. What are the unique needs of those farmers that are not your traditional farming community? We've seen a great deal. We've seen actually the number of small farmers and minority and women farmers has actually increased. And I think we have to make sure that our grant programs and the programs that we're administering are taking a look to see what are their unique needs and what we can do to try to facilitate those. So I think that's one of the strengths and an opportunity for SARE.
One of the distinctions of SARE has been its bedrock principle of listening to and empowering the voice of farmers, NGOs, as well as other stakeholders. So how can that principle be applied through AFRI or other programs such as NIFA and other USDA programs? How can we apply that same principle in terms of that listening and input session?
Krista, you've worked with SARE.
Well, I think it is an example of what works, and I think making sure that you learn from what is successful, taking those tactics and making sure everyone understands, and it not being a one-off, but helping the leadership understand that nothing is more valuable than having the farmers' voices involved, reaching out, and also listening. I think there's one thing that I learned in government: we talk a lot. We don't always listen as we should. We think we have the answers, and you have part of them as a government, but you learn more from people making a living every day. And so I think it's helpful to have people like Steve in the leadership role, because he's a farm kid himself and understands, but I think it also it needs to apply to a broader group of programs. But one thing I will say for USDA, and I can say this now being away from it, the heart and soul of that department and the commitment to agriculture and to farmers, all ranchers, no matter your size, no matter where you come from, the people there are just so dedicated. And I think they do care, and I think they do want to help farmers and ranchers, and they do want to listen. And it's also sometimes up to us to make sure that we don't just complain in the hallways, but we actually go sit down with leaders and talk with them, give them real world examples, invite them to your operation. Don't just talk anecdotally, but really do talk about real world, what's happening for you.
So this is for either one of you, and I think we've touched on it to a degree in terms of when we talked about soil health and cover crops, but I think this wants to go a little bit further. It's how can we encourage farmers to diversify their crops to support growing populations and conserve both soil as well as water?
I think it comes back to demonstrating the economics that actually sustainable agriculture pays. I think the more that we can do to demonstrate the economics so that it can be adopted by more farmers. I mean, we already have a lot of the folks in this room are believers. You've seen it. You've demonstrated it on your own farms. But there's a lot of other farmers out there who maybe have heard about a problem or two, or they're thinking back to any issues that might have occurred early on, or it didn't pay in a certain year. I think over the long term, the more that we can demonstrate the economics and that it pays, I think addressing the yearly cash rent issue, trying to think innovatively of how we address that, because I think of nothing more important than, frankly, resiliency. I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that we face, is how do we have agriculture be resilient in the face of changing weather, climate, whether it be droughts, whether it be 2-3 inch rains in an hour. That's where sustainable agriculture systems can make a difference.
I think a little peer pressure helps.
Yeah.
Your neighbor's successful and you start seeing why, and you start asking questions, and sometimes I think the best education happens at the coffee shop when farmers are talking about what they're doing and they're sharing information, and you're right by your neighbor's fields, and that 2 inches in an hour had a greater impact on your land than theirs, and you start to wonder why. So I think sometimes that's best education.
I was at an event, I'm trying to think where, I think it was in Illinois, and with a group of producers, and this gentleman was side dressing nitrogen, using a high clearance equipment, and somebody asked a very intelligent question. They said, well, what was it? What data or what study was the reason why you decided to start side dressing? And he went like this, and he said, well, all of a sudden, all my neighbors were doing it, so I thought it was something I should try. So there's your peer pressure as far as that goes. Here's a couple here that I'm not sure that there's real direct answers to, so these may be thought questions, but affordability of land is a huge barrier. This is, again, touching on transitioning back in terms of the farm or beginning farmers. What is being done or what can be done to address that? So tough question on this side, because I'm not sure if there is a real answer.
Again, I think the loan programs are probably one of the best things we can do, and then if we are able to try to set up those kind of mentoring programs where someone is willing to take a chance and help support.
I think the other thing I would just add is it's knowing about availability, and that is where the matching comes in, and it might mean that you have to relocate. It may not be in your part of a state or even your state where land is available or is it affordable. Land values do vary across the country, and I remember a young couple I met that had moved from the Northeast to Oklahoma because they could afford the land there. They could not in the Northeast because of just encroachment issues, demand issues for land, but a little cheaper in a southern a part of Oklahoma, and it was a total change of life for them. They were away from family, different kind of farming, but they wanted to farm and own their land so much that they took that big chance. And I stay in touch with them to this day. Very successful. They don't sound like they're from Oklahoma yet, but
yeah.
eventually they will. But I do think you have to have that kind of open mind and find out where maybe your niche might be, maybe somewhere different than you're thinking.
A couple of questions, and they're related, and this might be one of those things that just because of, and there's actually a couple other questions that are related to the same topic, and it might be one of those things where just because of the number of questions, it's highlighting and keying in on a point that we need to think about more. What strategies do you suggest to access to urban vacant plots and utilization for urban agriculture? And I'm going to read the second question as well, so you can kind of approach either one. So I run a nonprofit organization here in the St. Louis area, and I'm very interested in getting started with a local food program. So how do you suggest I and my team get started? My community is not quote unquote urban, but is in a poor suburb. What type of resources are there for me to be able to utilize?
There are some programs that are available. I mean, obviously there's some, and I'm sure you've researched these and found out some of the foundation loan and grant programs. I think there are some urban agriculture programs that are available through USDA to try to support urban agriculture. I would encourage you to follow up with your USDA office that can try to help provide some support there, some marketing support as well as some financial support.
And often I think there's local support. You know, there's community groups, there's even government groups that want to support these activities. I can remember the first time I talked to my daddy about urban farming. He said, "What in the heck?" And he didn't use heck. Is that? He could not imagine there was such a thing. And now it is more and more commonplace. I've seen the success. Vertical farming, farming in vacant lots, really changing the dynamics of a community and making such a difference, putting kids to work, veterans to work, creating food that goes to food banks. I mean, the stories of success are wonderful, and I think there are more and more resources in supporting that kind of activity, I think is important.
I think just based off the questions, it's obvious that there's a focal point here revolving both around beginning farming as well as urban agriculture in terms of things to be able to take back. We're getting closer to the end in terms of our panel, and one of the things I want to make sure that we capture, and I spend a lot of time on our own farm trying to think forward, 10, 20, 30 years from now, what do I need to be doing now to make sure that our operation, because it's not large, it's under 900 acres, what do we need to do to make sure we're positioned correctly? So it's one of the things I wanted to make sure to ask you is, what are one or two or three things that you see into the future that we should be thinking about, and it could be trends, it could be technology, but what are some of the things that the folks in this room should be thinking about, but maybe they've overlooked, or maybe they haven't given it sufficient priority? Anything that's top of mind there that's outside the norm of what we've talked about?
What comes to my mind, I mean, obviously we've already talked about the agriculture resiliency. I think that's going to be even more key, and related to that, I think water. Water is, I think, going to be one of the biggest challenges that we face in agriculture, not only here in the United States, but worldwide. How do we maintain agriculture production in the face of competition that we have, making sure that we're using it more effectively and efficiently than frankly what we are today, because we're facing competition from restoring environmental benefits where we're utilizing too much water, or also we're facing competition from urban areas. And so we're going to have to look for more both drought tolerant crops, more low moisture crops, more efficient irrigation systems. I think all of that's going to be very key to the future.
Yeah, so crops, soil health in terms of resiliency, excellent.
Yes.
So Krista?
Only to add, I think natural resources, obviously, and I think it's good, and who's going to be farming, and we've hit on that quite a bit. The thing that we haven't talked about, and I know we're running out of time, is the connection with consumers, with the general public, and helping them understand what it takes to farm, the tight margins, the lack of availability of land and other resources. I think there's just such a disconnect with the general public. So talking more, building more support for our farm programs, for USDA's budget, and for other programs that impact. I mean, I'm told that, I read some article, it's kind of fun, that more people take pictures of their food than they do their grandkids or their pets. But where that food comes from and what it goes into to make sure you have that beautiful plate, or you have the availability of safe, affordable food, as so many of us do in this country. I think making sure that we're having a conversation not just with each other, and I think that we tend to do that more in agriculture. We're comfortable with each other, we like to talk about these issues, but my job, as we talked about earlier in my introduction, is external facing. So much of my time I'm walking into what might be the lion's den. It's just consumers, it's NGOs who don't understand agriculture, who don't really care about agriculture except they want the food part, they want the pretty plate. So expanding that conversation and make sure we're having a good dialogue, we're listening to them as they listen to us in agriculture. I think it's one thing that we've got to continue to focus on.
So go ahead.
One other one, Alan, that comes to my mind as well, and it's hard to imagine during this time where we have record or near record commodity stocks, but in the context of that growing world population and profitability. But I do think that food waste is going to become, I mean, we've all heard a lot about it, we've talked about it, but I think really dealing with food waste where we're losing all the way from the farm, all the way through to the consumer, throwing out, losing around 30 to 40% of the food that we produce, that's going to become even a bigger issue that we need to address throughout the marketing chain.
So resiliency, water, food waste, earlier comment about transfer in terms of bringing people back to the farm, as well as the link to the consumer. I think that's something we definitely don't want to lose sight of, is that link to the consumer. And that's an area I think where, especially the folks in this room, can do a great job. Any other last thoughts before we take a break and move to our next set of sessions?
Just thank you. It's great to be in front of everybody, and thank you for what you do. I mean, you're the backbone of agriculture and of the economy, and we should never let any American forget that.
And I just want to say thank you as well, and thank you for being here, for showing up, for investing your own time and effort to make U.S. agriculture and world agriculture more sustainable. And I think the ideas that are gathered at this conference over the next couple of days from all of you is going to be extremely important. So thank you for what you do every day.
I guess the last thought I'll leave you with is that I've had the chance to be with both Steve and Krista in many small group sessions, and what I can tell you is that from that 20-some years of being with you, they're always forward-thinking, they're always looking to the future, and they always have the farmer at heart, and I think that is something that's commendable. So I just wanted to say I'm glad to be here up on stage with you. I want to, before we thank them for their time, we're going to take about a 45-minute break, and so at 10:30, we'll have our breakout sessions, which I believe are one set of escalators up, and thank you so much. So please help me in thanking both Krista and Steve.